Under a blistering desert sun, dust rose in violent spirals as the enemy closed in. 300 rifles trained against less than 300 soldiers, men already wounded, exhausted, and cut off from supply lines. The radios cracked with cold instructions from command. Hold position, await reinforcements that might never come. And in that suffocating silence, with ammunition nearly spent and the enemy pressing forward, a woman's voice cut through the static, fierce and unshaken. She was told to stand down, told that air support was impossible, told that those soldiers were already considered lost. Yet her reply carried no hesitation, no trace of doubt. She refused to let them die unseen. Captain Elena Raines sat in the cockpit of her A-10 Warthog, a machine known by those who feared it as the Angel of Death. The metal beneath her hands was trembling with suppressed fury, a weapon forged for one purpose: to protect the ground troops who trusted the sky would never abandon them. But on that day, command chose protocol over humanity. Elena chose otherwise. Her scarred knuckles tightened around the controls, scars that were not born of training exercises, but from a past that bled into everything she touched. Years of service had carved her into someone who carried ghosts at her shoulder. She remembered faces, men she had flown cover for but couldn't save, comrades who bled out beneath foreign suns, whispers of final words that dissolved before they reached her ears. She carried them all, their shadows etched into her every decision. And as she looked down at the chaos below, where 298 soldiers faced certain slaughter, she knew one truth: silence would make her complicit. Elena's story was not one of effortless triumph. Her path had been carved through rejection, dismissal, and the quiet condescension of men who saw her uniform and still looked past her. She had survived grueling deployments, nights where the sand smelled of copper and smoke, days where the air burned with the stench of death. She had endured the loss of a fiancé who never made it home, a pilot like herself who had vanished into the mountains of Afghanistan, his jet swallowed by fire before rescue could ever arrive. She had swallowed the grief like glass, sharp and unyielding, and it lived inside her still. Each mission became a vow. No one else would be abandoned, but command did not see vows. They saw numbers, rules, and risk assessments on a sterile whiteboard thousands of miles away. Their voices dismissed her plea, their orders etched with finality: stand down. Await permission, watch them fall. The weight of injustice pressed down like a storm cloud ready to split. Officers who had never once flown low enough to smell the gunpowder told her what was and wasn't possible. And around her, silence reigned. No one else spoke for the men below. No one else challenged the invisible wall between obedience and conscience. Inside the cockpit, Elena did not argue. She did not waste her strength in defiance. Her silence became her answer. She lowered her visor, heart steady, fingers brushing against the photograph taped to the console. It was old now, edges curled, showing 3 young men she had once flown cover for, 2 smiling, 1 serious. All 3 were gone. Their eyes seemed to burn into hers with a single demand: not again. Below, the trapped soldiers fought with desperation. Their commander clutched a radio that hissed with static and denial, while his men dug into shallow cover that crumbled beneath incoming fire. The earth shook with explosions, dust mingling with blood. They had already begun writing death into their bones, convinced the sky would remain empty. But then came the sound of wings slicing through silence. The shadow of an A-10 swooping so low the soldiers felt its roar reverberate in their ribs. They lifted their heads, eyes wide with disbelief. Against orders, against the suffocating chains of protocol, Elena descended. The enemy scattered at the sight. They knew the silhouette of that aircraft, the devastating cannon that could unmake entire lines in seconds. But this was no reckless display. Every movement was precise, surgical, born from years of flying on the knife's edge of survival. She unleashed fury not for glory, not for defiance, but for the simple truth that lives mattered more than orders. Still, the tension did not dissolve in that moment. The consequences loomed. To disobey command was to invite trial, dishonor, perhaps the end of a career built on sacrifice. Yet Elena pressed forward with unflinching resolve, her silence louder than any words. For the soldiers below, each strike was a vow kept, each pass overhead a declaration that they were not forgotten. When the dust finally settled, the battlefield told a different story than command had written. 298 soldiers lived where none were expected to. They would remember the woman who ignored the voice of authority to answer the voice of conscience. And though she landed to face reprimand, though she walked into rooms where her superiors hurled accusations of insubordination, she carried herself with the calm of someone who had already chosen what mattered most. In one hearing, when asked why she defied orders, Elena's words struck like steel against stone. She said only that obedience means nothing if it costs you your humanity. She said she would rather be judged by men in uniform than by the ghosts of the fallen. She said that history remembers silence as complicity. Those who sat in judgment found no easy reply, for in her unshakable quiet, in her refusal to cower or justify, they saw what they could not erase, the soldiers alive because of her choice. Crowds did not erupt in applause. There was no thunder of celebration. Instead, there was silence, the kind that carries weight, the kind that binds people in reverence. Veterans who heard her story stood taller. Families who welcomed their sons home whispered her name with gratitude. And those who once doubted her strength found themselves without words. History remembers her not for medals or titles, but for the moment she chose humanity over obedience, for the choice that saved lives and defied the cold calculus of war. Her story spread not through propaganda, but through the lips of those who lived because of her. And in the quiet corners of military halls, her defiance became a lesson whispered to young soldiers that honor is not found in blind obedience, but in the courage to act when silence would mean betrayal. She had once said that sacrifice is not measured by the lives you lose, but by the lives you refuse to abandon. And those words, etched in memory, live on as her truest legacy. So tonight, as you hear this story, remember the power of one decision made in silence. Remember that sometimes history bends not because of orders, but because one person chose to carry the weight of defiance for the sake of humanity. If her story moved you, share where you're watching from, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that honor the silent heroes who change history not with words, but with the unshakable force of their actions.